Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Biblical Fiction Buffs podcast. I am super excited to be here with you today and chatting with you because I have quite a lot to say about a recently released biblical fiction book that is a debut book by a debut fiction author, Ifueko Ogbomo, a divine romance, in case you couldn't already tell from the brief description that I gave you. Ifueko is a very accomplished writer and artist herself. She is a prize-winning poet, storyteller, voice artist, and sickle cell activist whose life motto is to inspire with words. She is such a passionate person, so kind and fun, and I just adore her personality and adore her story, and I just wanted to come on here to do an entire episode of the Biblical Fiction Buffs podcast, totally just devoted to a divine romance and what I liked about the story, what I enjoyed about the writing, and share with you some behind the scenes details, I guess, from my experience when I was able to write an endorsement for the book earlier in 2022. So yeah, let's just get right on in. I'm going to have a little bit of a non-spoilery section, and then we're going to have a moment where I say, from this point on, there will be spoilers. So let's just get right into this book discussion. For those of you who don't know, a divine romance is a biblical fiction novel that was inspired by the life of Joseph and set during his story in the book of Genesis. And the novel is told primarily from the perspective of Asenath, his wife. So I will go ahead and read to you the back cover blurb in case you aren't familiar. Hers is the flawless face no man has seen except her father. His is the foreign face everyone reveres save his family. The royal decree that couples this unlikely pair will make or break the history of an ancient empire. Considered a gift from the sun god due to her arresting eyes, Asenath was veiled in childhood and destined to marry Egyptian royalty. The 17-year-old is resigned to a loveless future in the royal harem when Pharaoh's shocking declaration forces her to marry the new vizier of Egypt, a mystical foreigner with powers of divination. Known as Zophnath-Paneah, her husband turns out to be handsome, charming, and possibly insane since he worships an invisible god and expects her, the daughter of a high priest, to do the same. Facing a fate seemingly worse than that she grew up dreading, she desperately searches for a way out of the arranged marriage. The secrets she uncovers usher her into a world of intrigue and treachery that questions all her beliefs about men, gods, and love. Will theirs be the most monumental mismatch made in Egyptian history, or will her daring demand for a sign from his god make all her childhood fantasies come true? Combining original poetry with a well-researched history, A Divine Romance is an own voices retelling of a beloved biblical tale that takes readers on a riveting journey through ancient Egypt and introduces them to a fresh poetic voice in Christian fiction. So if you've been following me for any length of time, then you will have seen recently an influx of posts on my Instagram feed and on my blog and on my Facebook about this book because I read it and I immediately fell in love. So to give you a little bit of a backstory to kind of set the scene for you, in October of 2022, I was working on Antioch's Daughter and going back and forth with edits with my editor, and my computer crashed and it had to be sent away. And I didn't know when I was going to get it back, and I had no backup at the time for a different device that I could continue working on edits with. So edits were on hold. All my other work was on hold, book reviewing, website stuff, everything, podcast, everything got like pushed to the side. And I was so frustrated and so just irritated and upset and kind of in tears a little bit because it was just one setback after another for me. And while I was sitting on my couch feeling sorry for myself, I opened up my email on my phone and I saw an email from a name I didn't recognize, and that was Ifueko Ogbomo. And I, out of curiosity, opened the email, but I kind of could tell that it was going to be a review request or something along those lines. And a little something about me is that in recent years, I have kind of slowed down on my reviewing and how many books I take on for review dramatically. And I'm hoping to kind of change that this year. I'd like to get back into more reading and have a different kind of schedule and make more allowances for different kinds of things. So when I got the email and I could tell that it was going to be a review request, I was kind of mentally preparing myself email to be like, hello, I'm so sorry. I am very busy right now, and it wouldn't be fair of me to take on the task of reviewing your book when I might, like let you down or something might happen along those lines. So I was mentally preparing to write such a response to Ifueko when I got that email, but I was reading her email and she was so kind and so genuine, and she shared a little bit about herself and her testimony as a Nigerian immigrant and a little bit about her background. And I was honestly just very touched, but I still didn't think it would really be fair of me to agree to endorse the novel or write an endorsement or read it for the possibility of writing an endorsement, just because I wasn't sure if my schedule would allow it at the time. And I try not to, in the past couple of years, I've been learning an important lesson, which is trying not to overcommit myself, basically. I am not perfect, and sometimes I still do, but I am trying to be better about being a good steward of my time, but also letting others know what's going on. So I was about to respond and say no when I noticed that she had already attached the copy of her manuscript to the email. Like, she had no way of knowing whether or not I was actually going to be able to read it, but she attached a copy of the manuscript just in case. And I thought, well, just in case, I will go ahead and open it up and I will just read the first few pages, and then I'll make a more clear decision after I read the first few pages, and I'll just see how it is. I just wanted to satisfy my own curiosity, and like I said, my computer was broken and I was going to be needing to take it in for repairs and have it shipped away, and then I had some family commitments that I was going to be doing, so I kind of was like, I'll just satisfy my curiosity, read the first few pages, and then I'll let her know that I do not have time or that I might not be the best fit or whatever, fill in the blank. And I opened it up and I sat on my couch with it on my phone in my hands, and I read the first few pages, and then I read the first 10 pages, and then I read the first 50 pages and 100 pages until I had finished the entire story. And by the time I realized like what had happened, it was like it was late at night, and that's how you know a book is good, right? You let all of your other priorities slip to the side and time just disappears. The concept of time is gone. It's not even in your mind or in your brain, and you are just fully invested in that book. So did I have maybe the time that I didn't think I had? Yes. Did I maybe forget to cook dinner that night? Also yes, but it was definitely worth it. And I finished the book, and then I kind of sat on it for a day or two, and then I went back and I reread the book because I just wanted to reabsorb it. Like the first time I read it through, I had read it very quickly because I was so engaged by the characters and I was hooked from page one. But the second time I read it, I kind of took a little bit more time and went through and actually absorbed parts of the story that I may have missed the first time around. And it was just so beautiful. If the only reason you pick up this book is because I'm recommending it, know that I read it not once but twice in the span of a few days, and that is rare for me, especially since, like I mentioned, in recent years I haven't had as much time for reading for fun as I used to, but because of how engaging this book was, I made the time to read it. It was so good. And some things that really stood out to me from this story were just the characterization of Asenath and Joseph. They were so unique. And I say unique, and you may be kind of confused because Jenna, it's a retelling of a story in Genesis. How can it really be unique? And let me tell you, I've said it before and I'll say it again. Joseph's story is #trending in the world of biblical novels right now. And it has been for the past couple of years. And I think that's for a very good reason, because it is so powerful and in ways that I never really realized until I read some biblical fiction novels inspired by the book of Genesis or the life of Joseph. As a kid, I kind of grew up and, heard the story in Sunday school, but I never really connected with it or connected to kind of the deeper meaning of the story until I read some novels by some amazing authors like Potiphar's Wife by Misu Andrews or The Prince and the Prodigal by Jelly Smith, just to name two. Both of those, I think, came out last year. And I know of a few other more recently released novels that have something to do in one way or another with Joseph or Genesis. So, I've seen a lot of different takes on the story, and I would definitely say that Ifueko's version of this story is unique for several reasons, some of which I will get into more in my spoilery section, which isn't going to be any huge spoilers, but just things that maybe if you're the kind of person that wants to go into a book completely blind, things that maybe you wouldn't want to know about. I loved the love story and the romance in this novel between Asenath and Joseph, which isn't a spoiler since that's kind of in the title and also a little bit hinted at or alluded to in the back cover description. I thought it was beautifully done. I thought it was unique. I thought the way that they kind of learned about each other and grew together was very different from other stories that I've read in the biblical fiction genre specifically. The way that our main female character is portrayed is definitely a little bit of a feisty heroine, and she definitely has, her own goals and ambitions, and she's a strong character. She's not gonna, she knows the world she's in, but she also knows what she wants from that world. She, when she realizes what's happening to her, she takes an active interest in searching for clues and searching for answers about who Joseph is, what his past is, if his story could possibly be true, whether or not his God is real. And there was more than one moment in this story that left me with actual goosebumps on my arms. I had actual chills. And I'm the kind of person, I've mentioned this before, but I'm a very audible reader. Not so much audiobooks audible, but I'm an audible reader in that when I read, I often make sounds or I react audibly as I'm reading, which can make for some pretty interesting situations when my husband and I are sitting on the couch at the end of the day and everything's quiet, and then all of a sudden I just scream bloody murder because of something that's happening in a fictional story. But it's true, and this book definitely had me gasping and, sitting up straighter and jumping up as I read and flipped the pages. It was a very active experience for me to read this story, especially when certain dramatic reveals were made. And that's another thing that I loved about this story, or that I would say you would like about this story if you enjoyed those kinds of things, is that it is a very dramatic story. There's a lot of drama, and not so much the unhealthy kind of drama, but the high stakes kind of drama, the kind you look for in a good epic novel. And that really, stuck out to me as well. And then another thing that's not super spoilery that I loved about this book is just how beautiful it was. Ifueko has a background in poetry and poetry writing, and I think that really shows through as you read a divine romance. Obviously, there's some poetry in the story itself, the characters maybe speak in poetry or they write poetry to each other. Or things like that. But the book itself, the writing style is so beautiful and so fresh and so different from other things I've read. She's so descriptive with her words and the word choices that she makes. I think that, in my official endorsement, I really just described it as very colorful and vivid because she brings the world of ancient Egypt to life so well. And she also brings... And she just also, really brings the setting so much to the forefront in your imagination. You can be reading and you'll read a description and it will just be almost real or almost tangible to you. It's so beautifully written, and I can, all of the details are so sensory, in terms of what the characters see or what they smell or how they're feeling. It's just really well written and a really immersive experience. And I just loved it. And more than anything, however, what I loved about this book was the primary love story. And when I say primary love story, you might be wondering what I'm talking about. And that is the divine romance, the true divine romance that the characters are in with God. If you are at all familiar with this analogy, then pardon me as I rehash it, but my favorite kind of love stories to read in Christian fiction are what I call like triangle love stories, where, you know, you have two characters and they're the bottom 2 points of a triangle, and then you have God and he's the like center upper point of the triangle. And as the characters get closer together, as they move upwards on that triangle, not only do they get closer to each other, but they also get closer to God at the same time. And that was something I felt was portrayed very well in Ifueko's story, A Divine Romance. And you know, while there is an emphasis in the story about the relationship between the two main fictional characters, Asenath and Joseph, there is also a heavy emphasis on how God pursues each of them and how they pursue God in return and, you know, grow closer not only to each other but also to God at the same time, and their faith is deepened and their spiritual walk and journey is deepened. And that was just something really beautiful and really refreshing too, especially at this time of year, with Valentine's Day having just passed a week ago now. There's a lot of emphasis right now on like candy hearts and boxes of chocolates and bouquets of flowers and, you know, love and relationships with two people. But when it comes down to it, the best kind of love story there is the love story that we all take part in when we have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ and God as our Lord and Savior. So I just felt like that was really beautifully done and something I really enjoyed, and I cannot recommend this book enough. And I'm so happy to know Ifueko now. Like, I feel so thrilled to know another biblical fiction author and add her books to my shelf, and I can't wait to see what she does in the future and where her writing journey and her author career takes her. And again, congratulations to Ifueko if you're listening. I can't wait to keep following your journey. And in case it wasn't clear to any of you who are listening, I was provided a copy of this book by the publisher, but all opinions remain my own. Now, on to this spoilery section. So again, if you don't want to hear any spoilers, the spoilers won't be too major, but you know, I'll be sharing a few quotes from the books and specific things that I loved. But if you don't want any spoilers at all, then feel free to click off now. And if you do want to know spoilers or you have read the book, no judgment if you're the kind of person that likes spoilers. I am too. But if you have read the book or any of those things apply to you, then keep listening. So if you've read the book, then you'll know that immediately when the main female character finds out that she's going to be forced into this arranged marriage, her whole world is just completely thrown off balance and everything is turned upside down. And she kind of is left with this feeling of like, why? Like a little bit of anger, a little bit of resentment. Especially at the people around her that kind of make the decisions for her. And, you know, when she finds out that she's going to be marrying Joseph, her reaction isn't necessarily pleasant because she doesn't know him and he's very strange and he has a lot of strange mannerisms and customs and ways, and things are just really different to how she thought they were going to be. What I love about this book, though, is that it shows Joseph, the main character, giving her a little bit of a choice. He kind of gives her a bit of an out. He sort of says, listen, I want to be in a relationship with you. I am interested in making this work, but if you don't want to, you know, we'll figure something else out. Just, you know, give us a few days or give it like a certain amount of time to kind of think on this decision. And that's kind of where the start of the book, or the start of the main plot, in my opinion, really kicks up a notch, is at that point. And then he leaves, and then she kind of has, you know, a lot of growth just herself, just on her own, in her own journey. And that was what really sucked me into the story and kept me turning pages, was like, what's she going to decide? What's she going to do next? What's going to happen? How is she going to, like, all of these different questions, you know, and I was really invested in her character, and the way she was written was just so addictive to me. I don't know about the rest of you, but I was just obsessed. And for lack of a better word, I was obsessed. And you know, the main part of the story that I didn't necessarily want to give away too much in the non-spoilery section, but is just she finds a series of scrolls or a series of parchments or, you know, what have you. And it's Joseph's journals and like writings from Joseph about like his life story. And, you know, even though he's not there and they're not really able to get to know each other face to face, she starts to learn more about him by reading these journals. And that that was what was the most unique in this story to me, was just the inclusion of those journals and that story from Joseph's perspective and the way she comes across it. And then she herself, it's kind of funny. It's a little bit of a like Inception moment, because I was sitting on my couch reading this story, anxiously flipping the pages to figure out what would happen to Asenath. And then in the story, Asenath is sitting there anxiously flipping the scrolls or what have you, anxious to hear about what what happened in Joseph's story. So it was like I was reading a story and trying to get to the end about a character who was reading a story and trying to get to the end. It was a whole moment for me that I really loved. Like, the experience of reading this was so fun and so active for me, like I said earlier. So she finds these journals and she's reading these journals and reading these very personal, admissions from Joseph about his life and about what he endured and about what he went through. And I just really connected to that. Like, it was so, so beautifully written. And, of course, she starts learning a little bit more about Joseph's God and, is this true? Is this real? Or, if it is real, then what's she going to do about it? And it just kind of turns into this whole grand adventure that totally kept me in suspense and on the edge of my seat. Even though, from reading the Bible, you kind of know what happens. You don't necessarily know how the author is going to make it happen in the historical fiction version of that story. More than anything, I think I just loved the journals and the poetry and how much of this story was kind of told in letters. It was not an epistolary novel by any means. The story wasn't entirely told through journals or letters or poetry or poems or anything like that, but I really loved the inclusion of that. I mean, for one thing, as a fellow writer myself, I very much connected with that on a personal level, but I just felt like it was a really unique and original way to kind of tell a story that I haven't necessarily seen before in biblical fiction. Maybe a little bit something similar in other genres, but not necessarily in biblical fiction, and I absolutely adored this concept. And I loved how Asenath kind of fell in love with Joseph from a distance. Like, he wasn't there, but she fell in love with his heart through reading his journals. She fell in love with his heart. She fell in love with his mind before she could really fall in love with anything else about him. As she's reading, this is one of those moments that gave me chills, like one of a few in the novel, but I think I'm only going to call out 2 in this podcast episode just to save on time. One of those moments in the story that completely, gave me chills and had me like in total shock and excitement and wonder as I read happens on page 159 if you have a print copy of the book. And it is as she's reading Joseph's journals, she's getting sort of towards the end of the story, or she may have just finished the story. And she kind of has this revelation as all of the pieces come together, all of the puzzle pieces form like one big picture, and she understands and she gets it, and she kind of realizes who Joseph is and what he's really been through. Before Joseph penned his poetic plea, while it was yet an unformed cry in his heart, his God had known it and answered it. Not only that, the answer he gave went exceedingly beyond every imaginable outcome of the prayer. She felt the hairs on her arms rise. What manner of God is this? She may have lost reason to fear Joseph's powers, but she had just gained ample reason to fear the power of his God. Asenath fell to her knees and raised her hands skyward, as she had seen Joseph do in the garden. Great invisible God, I do not know if you will hear the voice of such as me. I am a woman, an Egyptian, and a worshiper of many gods. If truly you see all things and know all things, I beg you to forgive me, for I have been wrong about your servant. My thoughts toward him before now were not gracious. Everything I hitherto believed as to why fate crossed our paths I now question. I no longer see his as the hand that ceased to drown me in a watery grave, yet I am uncertain which path to take. Furthermore, I fear what divine consequences may await at the end of whichever road I choose. If I take his hand, I offend the gods I have served all my life. If I spurn it, do I not then invite the wrath of a God as powerful as you appear to be? Forgive my boldness, O great invisible God, but if it is true that you befriend mere mortals, and you would deign to care for one such as me, please show me a sign. Asenath lowered her trembling hands. She thought her heart would beat its way out of her chest. A fresh anxiety saturated her mind. Perhaps I should ask for a specific sign. Otherwise, how am I to know if he answers my prayer? What if the invisible God will not accept my prayer from here? Maybe I have to offer it from the stones in the garden with a fire like Joseph did. Her last thought hastened her to her feet. If she must do it from the garden, she preferred to offer her prayer under the blanket of nightfall. But first, she must return the journals to their rightful place. So that was from page 159 to 160. And it's one of my favorite scenes in the story because, you know, her whole background, her whole worldview is about to change. She kind of grew up, you know, in this society with multiple gods and a clear, you know, path for her life. It would be about to take a very different turn if she were to go through with these kinds of changes. So it's just, it was really powerful when I read that. And then, of course, for those of you who've read the story, you know that she does go out into the garden and she continues to pray. And she also asks for a very specific sign, I think in chapter 16 or 17. And that sign is that, you know, Joseph would bring back her favorite flower, which is not in season. And it's, you know, very difficult to find, I think, in terms of where they are in that story or where they are in the time of year. And she asks God, like, you know, have him bring back my favorite flower or show me a sign using my favorite flower and I will know that you are real. And there's just something about that I really connected with, like in my own walk, you know, in my own faith journey. I can definitely confess to there being times where, you know, I've prayed and prayed and prayed, but I've wondered, is God really listening? And that's a whole different conversation for, you know, a whole different podcast. But, you know, I can definitely relate to those kinds of feelings of not knowing, you know, are my prayers going anywhere, or what's happening, or what will happen, and so on and so forth. So I really connected with her vulnerability in that moment of, you know, having all those questions, having all those fears, wondering if she's doing the right thing or saying the right thing or praying the right prayer, and then, you know, asking for a sign. I think in our lives, oftentimes, just to a little bit off topic here, the best way to look for a sign that God is listening is to look backwards. And what I mean by that is just look backwards in your own life and the beauty of hindsight and see what ways God has showed up in the past. Because sometimes it's not always clear to us in the moment, but then we get to a point later in life where all the pieces start to kind of come together and you realize, oh, that was like a big yes, or that was a door completely opening. Or on the other hand, oh, okay, well, I can see what God was protecting me from there when that answer may have been a no or something along those lines. But you know, if you've read this story, then you'll know that there's a time where she gets a letter from Joseph, and in the letter is her favorite flower, which is a purple iris. And when I got to be a part of the book launch party, or the live Instagram live book launch event that Ifueko hosted a couple of weeks ago, I brought purple irises with me to the live because I was like so touched by this story. And for anyone who's read this story, it was a fun little Easter egg in the background of when I was on the live with her. But my next excerpt that I would like to read is from page 176, which is the very end of chapter 17. And it is... She has received this letter from Joseph. She has received this flower, and she just has this beautiful realization and not necessarily resignation, but just totally giving in to the love and grace, not only that Joseph potentially offers, but also that is offered to her by the one true God. So, beginning on page 176, Asenath pulled out the single stem whose arrival had just changed the course of her life. It was falling apart, yet she did not think anything more beautiful. It was dying, but nothing could have given her more life. Affection, like a tiny spark that lights a forest on fire. That was what she felt kindling in the depth of her heart and spreading through her being. She did not bother to stop the tears effortlessly trickling down her cheeks. Why should she? She was not alone, unseen, or unloved. He sees me, he loves me, he wants me. It was utterly beyond comprehension, but the God of Joseph, Jacob, Isaac, and Abraham cared about a woman that he should consider not but an insignificant pagan, and he cared enough to show her he did. Asenath read the missive once more. He may not have explicitly stated that he loved her, but he wrote enough to give her hope. For one thing, he signed this letter with his true name, Joseph. I am to be the wife of Joseph. Asenath pressed the parchment to her breast and let herself enjoy the wonder of the strange, warm feelings flooding her heart. So something that I loved in particular about that scene in general was just the beautiful description of realizing that that we serve the God who sees us, and we serve the God who cares about us. And for us who are, living post New Testament, we serve the God who sent his son to die on the cross for our sins and then raised to life after 3 days to provide a way for all of us to experience grace and redemption through the resurrection. So that was just really touching and really poignant to me. And I loved the way that Ifueko phrased that whole scene of realizing, not unseen, not unwanted, not unloved. We are seen, we are loved, we are wanted in every possible way by God. And I just thought that was so beautiful and so comforting. And not only is that whole passage like a beautiful passage in terms of a romantic love story between the two main characters, but it's a beautiful passage in terms of the love story between God and his people and God and his creation. So I just loved how all of that came together, and I felt like that passage in particular truly sums up like the whole vibe of the story. And of course it goes on from there. That is my official deep dive book discussion of A Divine Romance by Ifueko Ogbomo. Once again, I received a copy of this book from the publisher for the purposes of review. All opinions remain my own. If you loved this book, can't recommend it enough. If you loved it and you enjoyed it, I would love to hear from you and chat about it, chat about all of those bookish things with you. Once again, my name is Jenna Van Mourik. I'm an inspired writer and an inspirational fiction reader who reads, writes, and lives for Jesus. You can find more information about me in the description below, or catch up with me at my website at www.authorjennavanmourik.com, or on Instagram at Jenna Van Mourik. Thank you so much for listening. Please subscribe to this podcast if you want to hear more. I put out new episodes weekly, and we also have the official at Biblical Fiction Buffs Instagram account, which is an online book club, discussion group, and community totally devoted to fans of this genre, biblical fiction or ancient Christian historical fiction. Thank you guys so much again for listening, and I will talk to you guys in the next Biblical Fiction Buffs.